Instead of thinking how can we boost the GDP, how can we have prices going up, how can we have the profits going up, we have to think instead, how do we bring down the prices? How do we make more and more things free? How do we allow everybody to have a good quality of life, even with no money, because everything they need is free or effectively free? So that's creating an abundance economy rather than trying to create a very profit-heavy society. And we should be focusing not on GDP but on overall human flourishing.
David, thank you for being part of Change I Am Possible podcast. Really appreciate you doing this for me. So would you be able to explain what Industry 4.0 is and what is going to be the impact of Industry 4.0 on people and institutions and companies?
I see Industry 4.0 as a part of an even bigger trend, which is the fourth industrial revolution. Different historians divide up history in different ways, but basically we are gathering pace for a new set of revolutions. It's in four areas. There's N, B, I, C. N is nanotech, B is biotech, I is infotech, and C is cognotech. Nanotech means we're controlling molecules more precisely, able to do smaller computers than ever before. Biotech means we're able to edit not just the programs on our smartphones, but we're able to edit our own human nature via gene editing. Infotech means not just that we calculate and compute, which we've been doing for a long time, that's part of the third industrial revolution. It means that the algorithms are able to, by themselves, learn from big data and come up with new insights. So it's not old-fashioned artificial intelligence expert systems, it's deep learning. And the C part, cognotech, means that we're going to understand the brain more fully and we're going to have more amazing internal experiences and virtual realities as well as physical realities. And all four of these revolutions are gathering pace. I think the next 15 years is possibly going to be the most turbulent time in human history, and I know that's a big claim. Now, part of that is sometimes called Industry 4.0. It's when some of the techniques that I've just been talking about, in particular the techniques of deep learning, big data, are applied into automating industrial processes, automating relationships. I see that as important, and it's useful to have a good discussion about Industry 4.0, but actually it misses the bigger picture, which is the fourth industrial revolution is going to change society, change humanity more profoundly, either for good, hopefully, or for bad, if we're not careful.
Right. And so what would be the immediate effect of Industry 4.0 on the general populace?
Well, it's not just one thing. It's many things. It's a bit like if we go back to the printing revolution, when Gutenberg managed to create a printing mechanism and more books were produced. It took a long time because then the pace of change was slower, but still within decades it sparked off religious reformations, it has sparked off a huge upsurge in learning, literature was everywhere, people got access to information much more than before, literacy rates skyrocketed. What was the single effect? You can't say there was a single effect, there was multiple effects on human capability. With Industry 4.0, again, every field of life is going to be transformed. It's going to transform education, more people are going to be able to find more useful information online to supplement what they might get in a physical education. It transforms healthcare because with analysis of our health data and analysis of data from many other people around the world, literally billions of people in due course, we're going to be able to find more precise interventions that will help each of us deal with whatever ailments we're suffering. And it's going to boost our mental experience too, because we're going to have more of a track record of what makes us get into various moods and aspects. And we're going to be able, therefore, to, dare I say it, shortcut what people used to have to take years or decades to achieve via programs of meditation or therapy or yoga. With these new interventions based on big data and analytics, more people are going to get to these deeper levels of consciousness and meaning much more quickly. So every area of life is going to be transformed.
Right. So you mentioned NBIC, nanotech, biotech, infotech, and cognotech. There are these huge promises at this point in time that how nanotechnology is going to really revolutionize the healthcare. There's talks about how you could actually miniaturize a small robot which could be injected in your bloodstream. Can you just kind of like give me a little more details about nanotechnology? Maybe each. First, we'll just start with nanotechnology, and then we'll go into biotechnology, infotech, and cognitech.
So nanotechnology itself is multiple things. It's better sensors, more low energy sensors are everywhere, gathering information, either about what's going on in the body or what's going on inside pipelines, going on in building sites, going on in the environment. So there are smaller sensors. Nanotechnology is also involved in improving 3D printing, manufacturing processes. There's more precise control over where all the little bits go when they're printed. So it's not just 3D printing, by the way. We get 4D printing, which is when you create something that's designed to evolve over time if electrical fields are applied or temperature gradients are applied and so forth. So the sensors, there's 3D and 4D printing. There's new kinds of materials. With nanotechnology, we are able to get stronger, more resilient materials. There are nano wires, there are nano sheets, nanoparticles. But possibly the most interesting is what you mentioned, the nanobots. It's when computers, which used in my childhood to fill whole rooms and then became mini computers and eventually fitted inside pockets. This was my professional experience, the mobile computing and smartphone industry. Then they fit on watches. They're getting smaller and smaller, and they will fit inside the bloodstream. Some people say this is just a science fiction dream, but there are already things here. There are things like nano origami. That means that you can design little molecules to fold up in particular ways and carry other molecules to particular parts of the body, and then the packaging unfolds and deposits the drug treatment to a precise part of the body. So I write a bit about this, by the way, in one of the chapters in my book, The Abolition of Aging, when I bring people up to date with what's sometimes called nanosurgery or nanomedicine. That's the abolition of aging. So it's taken a while. Eric Drexler wrote about nanotechnology in the late 1980s. His famous book, Engines of Creation, set out more or less all of this vision, which I've spoken about. And vision has been delayed for various reasons. People didn't work enough on the molecular scale nanofactories that he envisioned. But it is coming. And recently, the Nobel Prize in Chemistry, I think this is 2016, was awarded to 3 scientists around the world who had done work on nanoscale motors of various sorts to allow the combinations of small molecules to act as small motors or levers and so forth. So there is progress happening. In fact, the statement by the Nobel Prize Committee when they awarded this prize said, for nanotechnology today, it's a bit like electrical motors were in the 1830s, when Michael Faraday and others had done the experiments and proved the connections. People saw the vague possibilities, but nobody imagined that there would be air conditioning built out of this, or dishwashers built out of this, or indeed industrial computers. So today, with the Nobel Prize for Nanotechnology and Chemistry, it's still hard for people to understand fully the impact on food manufacturing, on medicine, and I haven't mentioned possibly the most interesting side of all, quantum computing. Quantum computing is difficult to predict. It's hard to know exactly how fast that's going to improve, but it involves careful, precise positioning of things, and it's possible that improvements in nanotechnology will see leap forwards in quantum computing, which is an interesting example of how the 4 things I mentioned, NBIC, they interact. So improvements in nanotech will improve infotech computing.
So NBIC, you said nanotechnology, biotechnology, infotech, and cognitech, right? So biotechnology, synthetic biology is supposed to be the next big thing, right? Everybody is talking about CRISPR, Cas9, genetic editing and stuff like that. There is Yankui He, who just maybe recently kind of CRISPR'd the first genetic babies, right? And there was a huge backlash, So there are obviously people like Joshua Zayner, who's got your do-it-yourself genetic kit, So where is the synthetic biology movement going at this point in time, and where How do you think it's going to impact us?
Well, synthetic biology has been here for quite a while. It's not just some future vision. We've got recombinant DNA, which allows us to get little organisms like E. coli to create mass quantities of useful proteins. How insulin was created via this kind of mechanism. We used to have to get insulin for people with diabetes. It used to be collected from animals such as cows. And then we managed to create synthetic insulin via this genetic reprogramming of, as I said, the E. coli, I believe in this case. Other people use other organisms. So we are already seeing some remarkable work from synthetic biology, but it's only the beginning. And just as synthetic chemistry transformed the world, this is part of this second industrial revolution, along with electricity, when people discovered how to make artificial fertilizer, Haber-Bosch process, which meant that agriculture could be very significantly improved. When we weren't just stuck with the chemicals we found in nature, but we were able to build new chemicals, it changed the world. And now, with synthetic biology, we can create new life forms. Currently, we've just slightly modified existing life forms, but over time, we could create all kinds of new bacteria that might play a good role in sucking CO2 out of the atmosphere. We might find new ways to grow healthy food. There is very fascinating work done on algae manufacturing with use of low energy to create algae which can then be fed into the food process in multiple levels. You mentioned about CRISPR, which is when we can edit the DNA, and it's been a remarkable progress, more than people expected. It, year after year, for many years, surprised the researchers with its capabilities. It's still early days too with CRISPR, and by the way, people are finding possible improvements on CRISPR the whole time. But there's other ways to reprogram cells too. I would refer to the so-called Yamanaka Factors. This is from a Japanese scientist who also won a Nobel Prize. I'm not sure if I remember his name exactly, Shoji Yamanaka. He discovered that if you add 4 genetic factors, it can reset the aging of individual cells. It can turn them from a differentiated cell back into a pluripotent stem cell, which means it can then turn further into something else. So undoing the aging is something we're all interested in, because the older we get, the more our body starts falling to pieces, the more our minds start losing their power. And if we can undo some of these trends, it's potentially going to save us enormous costs in healthcare, because we will no longer be subject to the diseases of aging. So these Yamanaka factors have more recently been improved further by scientists in Harvard. I refer to David Sinclair, who has written a very interesting book about the whole thing. It's called Lifespan. I would recommend it to all your readers. Why we age and why we won't need to age. And he's found out that by just using 3 of the 4 factors, you can do something even better than resetting cells all the way to their pluripotent state. You can keep them in the same form, but you can bring them back younger somehow. So instead of having epigenetic modifications, which all our cells do over time, it can bring them back into a younger state. And this is working well in various animal models, and potentially will be applied in humans before long.
Right. So yes, I think we're living in fantastic time. There's people like David Sinclair, Aubrey de Grey, and Google's offshoot company Calico. They're fronting this conversation where they're saying that aging should be treated as a disease. Right. So when do you see like the first human life extension which could go beyond 120 or stuff like that? When do you think that could be a possibility?
So if I refer back to this again, the abolition of aging. So what I say in here is there's a 50% chance that by 2040 we will have widely available effective treatments that will reset our aging, available for everyone. So what I'm saying there is that by 2040 there will be a 50% chance that there will be treatments widely available for everybody to reset their aging. So it's not by no means certain. It depends on whether enough resources are applied to this. It's still an unpopular field. People prefer to think in different terms about aging. They say it's more important to help people age gracefully. Well, that's important, that people who become old and infirm should be looked after well and should be respected. That's all true, and it's good, but there's something much more powerful we can do for people who are aging, which is we can actually make them younger again. So I project various trends. I look at how many people were working in the industry. I look at the 1980s. There were only a handful of people doing serious research on reversing aging in the 1980s. Every 10 years, however, the 1990s, the 2000s, the 10s, roughly there's been 10 times as many people working in the field. So by the time you get to the 2030s, I envision about 1 million people from all around the world doing very serious work on that. And I believe that's enough. I believe 1 million people working on this field, looking at all the possibilities of CRISPR editing, of Yamanaka reprogramming, of senolytics, which is when we stimulate the body to recycle the zombie cells that we grow, with autophagy, which is when an individual cell can recycle its own internal components, and with many other things, stem cell treatments and so on. I believe they will accumulate and grow in power, and so there's a 50% chance by 2040 we will be living in a world in which aging has been abolished. And maybe somebody who's in their 90s today, possibly, will be in their 120s then, and fit and healthy.
There are actually people who are doing biohacking, for longevity, and there are medicines which are available off the counter, like metformin, NDA, NMN. So would you want to share more light on infotech and cognotech? And do you think these, like you said, eventually these things are going to converge, right? Because cognotech, we know so little about our brain. So, can you shine more light on infotech and cognotech, please?
So all four of the revolutions do interfere with each other. They give new possibilities. The more we understand artificial intelligence, for example, the more we're likely to be able to model the brain better. And vice versa, the more people study the brain, the more they're able to copy ideas of how the brain works into their own artificial intelligence systems. And it's no surprise that many of the world's largest artificial intelligence companies are hiring huge numbers of neuroscience PhDs. Why? Because they understand that there are things going on in the human brain which we don't yet understand sufficiently, and we're not yet able to model in our artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence today is dominated by deep learning based on big data. And you need a great deal of data in order to teach a system the difference between, say, a cancerous cell and a non-cancerous cell in a scan, a mammogram, for example. You need a great deal of information to teach the system the difference between cats and dogs, whereas our children don't need to be shown 10,000 pictures of cats and 10,000 pictures of dogs in order to reliably differentiate the two species. So what's going on here? And people have got lots of ideas, and we're trying to test and develop these ideas further and copy them into artificial intelligence. The field is sometimes called transfer learning. The idea is that once you've built up enough of a system that understands one field of vision, then you can apply it more quickly to many other fields of vision. And this was shown recently by Google's DeepMind, when the software they developed to play Go very well was tweaked and was able to play shogi, Japanese chess, very well, with only 2 hours of training from scratch. Imagine it's like a baby came out of the womb and 2 hours later it was playing Japanese chess, the best in the world. And then they tweaked it further and said, all right, learn the rules of Indian chess or Western chess, whatever you want to call it. And within 4 hours, it was playing better than the best software ever written to play chess. So this is transfer learning from one field into another, which people had said previously was impossible, that you can't get that kind of transfer. So it's still early days with transfer learning, and people are scanning the brain to understand how that works, scanning in a literal sense, but also in a kind of a research figurative sense, and applying the techniques there. So that's how study of the brain can boost study of artificial intelligence. And finally we'll get there, not just in the physical reality, but in the internal spaces of virtual reality, which I believe we're going to be spending more time with. The virtual reality spaces of today are interesting and good, but they're nothing like the sense of realism and vividness that we're going to be experiencing in the future. It'll be like jumping into a whole new world, and it'll be a tremendous boost to our experience in all kinds of ways.
Right, fair enough. So you're one of the early movers, when it comes to the mobile phone industry. You are the founder of Symbian. So tell me, what is the future of the mobile phone? Do you see that like a phone and a computer converging into one single wearable device?
So I think people will still carry a phone with them, but increasingly the phone will be supported by wearable devices, as you said, including these smart earbuds and smart glasses. But the potential evolution of the phone, I think the most important aspect of the phone, which is going to distinguish the successful phones from the unsuccessful phones in the future, will be the quality of the artificial intelligence that's in it. The evolution of Siri or Google Assistant or other assistants that people are working on, like Samsung, Bixby. To what extent do people find these artificial intelligence really engaging and supportive? And that may help people to decide which phone to buy in the future, because increasingly there's less differentiation in terms of the screen and the camera, though there is still some to be had. But there will be, does the phone understand you? Because still it's a struggle. Earlier on I had to struggle to find an app. Before we started talking, I was looking for an app on my phone. I ought to have just been able to say a few words and the app would have materialized in front of me. And so that wasn't too bad. Other people struggle a great deal to get the effects out of their phones that they want. And the more artificial intelligence the phone has, with an appreciation of the user's emotional state as well, so that it might adjust its displays and interface depending on our emotional state at any time. That's maybe the differentiating factor. On the other hand, there's another school of thought which I also think is important, which is that the phones that are successful in the future will be the ones that the users can feel confident are respecting their privacy and security. Increasingly we're going to be hacked through our mobile phones. Increasingly we are upset at what the big tech companies are doing with our data, selling on our data in various ways. And Apple are making the claim that they are more reliable than other companies in terms of not relying on user data. And to an extent it's true, because they're not selling adverts in the same way that Google is and Microsoft are. So they're just making money, they say, by selling the phone. And the question is this going to be borne out in reality? And will people be sufficiently upset by other operating systems discarding or being dangerously careless with their data? So that might be the future. And one more thing, another possible vision which is going to differentiate these phones is how good they are at improving our healthcare. Because all the phones have got health apps associated with them, and the health apps today aren't really that good. Some people find them useful, but they don't make a huge difference for most people. But maybe that's going to change. So when our wearable devices are connected with even better artificial intelligence and leading us to be healthier and healthier, in all kinds of ways, giving us coaching on what to eat, what to sleep, how to sleep, what to think about. Some of the phones might be better than the others in boosting our health, and then that might be a reason for people to say, I used to buy this kind of phone, but now I'm switching to here. So there are three possible futures: that AI will be the differentiating winner, that privacy and security will be the differentiating winner, and focus on healthcare will be the differentiating winner. Which is going to be the most important? I don't know. Let's wait and see.
Right. So talking about artificial intelligence, at this point in time, if you see most of the artificial intelligence in a very narrow space, whether it's a voice assistant in the form of Siri or Google Assistant can do just that, right? That's about it. And then at the CES 2020, Samsung introduced Bolly, a personal assistant, but like I said again, these are it's in a very narrow space, and then there are these people who are researchers and who've been in the industry and who say that eventually artificial intelligence is going to become artificial general intelligence, where the machine's going to get sentient, where it's going to have like human intelligence, right? Do you see that happening, or do you see that as a possibility? If yes, what's the time frame that you're looking at something like that? If that happens, what would be the impact on society?
So there's two things. Is will AI become as intelligent as us in all aspects, and will these devices become sentient? You mentioned them both in the same breath, but I think we can probably distinguish. It's possible that AI will become as generally intelligent as us, but it won't be sentient. It won't have the same inner feelings. We don't understand consciousness and sentience well enough to give a good answer on that. But even if they don't become sentient, it still will be completely humanity changing when that happens. The changes I talked about earlier on as the changes of the fourth industrial revolution, which are enormous and huge, which we're just beginning to see, they will be in turn dwarfed by what we sometimes call the fifth industrial revolution, which is when we have artificial general intelligence. We are making some progress towards that. I mentioned the transfer learning earlier, in which people discovered that software which was trained on one task was unexpectedly capable of doing other tasks too. More generally, that is what happened with deep learning and neural networks. The convolutional neural networks and the recurrent neural networks that people developed for one task. It turns out that for a number of other tasks they were good as well. So not just image recognition, but also speech comprehension and also speech translation. Now, they haven't worked in all fields yet, but increasingly they're surprisingly effective. So it's not yet general intelligence, but it's steps along the way. Will we have artificial general intelligence? I think quite likely we will have it. It will have it unless society takes a bad turn, basically, unless society destroys itself, which is possible, sadly. We have lots of evidence that we are collectively becoming stupider rather than just more intelligent, and our politics around the world has much to cause disquiet. Even good politicians are sometimes doing bad things. And bad politicians, even though they do good things, sometimes are doing even worse things than before. So there are reasons to worry that we won't get to the fifth industrial revolution, because we will use the tremendously powerful technologies of the fourth industrial revolution in bad ways. Surveillance, manipulation, chemical weapons, biological weapons, and so forth. But assuming we are sufficiently wise to avoid these pitfalls, I think there's a 50% chance we will have artificial general intelligence by 2050, which is the middle of the century. And I think there's a 10% chance we'll have artificial general intelligence by 2025, which is in 5 years' time. So that's quite a bold claim. I'm not saying it's likely. I'm saying it's quite unlikely, but it's not completely impossible. And the reason is we don't know quite how big an impact future breakthroughs will have. It's like deep learning surprised people in how much it was able to do once we discovered how to use it well. By the way, of course, it was an old idea. People have been discussing neural networks since the 1940s with McCullough and Pitt. And then Marvin Minsky and Seymour Papert in the 1970s basically convinced most people that they wouldn't work. You know, they had a book in which they said you can't even solve very simple problems with neural networks. Turns out, of course, they only considered a simple configuration of neural networks, and when you have multi-layers, then the proof didn't work. So it's been around for a long time. Neural networks went slower than enthusiasts wanted, and then suddenly went faster than enthusiasts expected. It could be the same with the forthcoming breakthroughs. And I see 6 possible breakthroughs that might accelerate us towards artificial general intelligence. We don't have time to go through them all, but I'll just briefly mention there's the generative adversarial networks, in which you've got 2 networks competing with each other. That is again and again surprising people with what it produces. Then there's affective computing, that's computing that has more emotional intelligence built into it. There is more of the transfer learning, which I've talked about earlier. Fourth, there is more insight from evolutionary algorithms, which have been around for a long time too, a bit like the neural network algorithms. They didn't quite work. Maybe we'll have a breakthrough with some of the evolutionary algorithms. Fifth, there is more insight from neuroscience. People are studying the brain intensely. Sixth, there is work of people like Judea Pearl, whose famous book is saying that what we need is AI to understand causation, not just correlation, not just patterns, but what's the cause behind the patterns. We humans, we don't just see patterns, we tend to infer causes. The reasons these things happen together is one of them is causing the other. And that's not built into today's statistical analysis. And Judea Perel is a writer who said that if we do understand this, then we'll make big breakthroughs. I said 6, I actually meant 7. The 7th possible breakthrough is work by people like Ben Goertzel with his decentralized networks of AI modules. And the view is that each individual module won't become hugely more intelligent than today, but it's when they all work in a network, then suddenly an AGI will emerge from that. A bit like in the human brain, although we're not sure. There isn't a single master module that's smarter than all the others. The human intelligence probably emerges from a combination of multiple modules networked together. So perhaps if we find out how to network together the existing modules and some of the other enhancements I mentioned, that will suddenly see artificial general intelligence there. So out of these 7 possibilities, who knows what impact each of them will have when we make these breakthroughs, but I wouldn't rule out the possibility that suddenly we'll have self-improving AI faster. And self-improving AI will make the acceleration go more than before, because it will no longer be dependent on us slow-moving humans to make the improvements. It will be able to improve itself. It will be able to read all the articles on Wikipedia, all the research articles written in every language on artificial intelligence, and that system will be able to figure out by itself, this article written by an obscure researcher in Bangalore, or some researcher in Romania or Peru, whatever, that was ignored by his or her peers, but it turns out to have the crucial insight. This AI will be able to read all these articles, and it will reform its own code. Overnight, it will reboot itself. Overnight, it'll be 3 times more powerful. And then when it's 3 times more powerful, it will, guess what, it'll be able to redesign itself in an even more profound way. So that's the possibility of a fast takeoff. Now, whether the fast takeoff will happen or not is open to discussion. Some researchers say it can't happen. I think we need to keep an open mind. And so for all these reasons, I think we could be surprised at how quickly AGI eventually comes. What's the implications for humanity? Very profound indeed. When we are no longer the smartest creatures around, it will change all kinds of things. Even before we get there, even with today's AI, society needs to change dramatically. More and more jobs are being replaced. More tasks are being done by AIs, automation, than by humans. More and more tasks will change. We don't yet see large-scale technological unemployment. What we're seeing is greater technological underemployment. People are earning less than they'd expected to, because it turns out that the most interesting, most value-adding parts of the job are being done by software and AI instead. So we're already seeing the start of this, with more and more people feeling dissatisfied with life. That's part of why we're having more people with mental illness, as talked about before. It's also part of why people in at least some parts of the world are voting for politicians that are promising the earth but not able to deliver it. It's a dangerous trend. So we need to rapidly address these growing inequalities, which is being caused by today's AI, before they get even worse with tomorrow's AI causing even more technological unemployment, even more inequality, even more unemployment. So we're going to have to restructure society in a big way, frankly, which means something like a universal basic income as part of the solution, something like changing the priority for society. Instead of thinking, how can we boost the GDP, how can we have prices going up, how can we have the profits going up, we have to think instead, how do we bring down the prices? How do we make more and more things free? How do we allow everybody to have a good quality of life, even with no money, because everything they need is free or effectively free? So that's creating an abundance economy rather than trying to create a very profit-heavy society. And we should be focusing not on GDP but on overall human flourishing.
Right. But do you think that the powers that be would allow something like that? You spoke about free, right? I mean, you spoke about universal basic income. Yes, I mean, I do see the possibility where the way things are growing at this point in time, artificial intelligence, it's in such a narrow space, but eventually when it grows, it's going to impact society. And largely, the automation is going to impact the job industry, right? Millions are going to be jobless, right? And then, do you see universal basic income coming in at that point in time? Because I mean, what what are humans supposed to do? When all of the jobs are being automated and everything is being done by machines, do we just get back, start playing guitars, singing songs? What will be the purpose? I mean, will humanity lose purpose when something like that happens?
Well, it should be wonderful, because we all look forward to having more free time. We say, well, I'm busy working, but I'm looking forward to the weekend or the holiday when I'm going to be able to do what I really want to do. And it should be wonderful that we're able to do what we want to do.
But isn't grass always greener on the other side? Like, for example, today, I mean, I want to have maybe like Thai food a lot, because I don't eat, I get to eat a lot. But then if I keep on eating Thai food almost every day, will humanity eventually get bored of just living that very easy life? Are you just sitting by the beach, possibly, maybe just, what are your views on something like that?
So there is a movie that sort of shows this future. It's called WALL-E. It's made by Disney or Pixar Entertainment. It shows people in the future. The Earth was in a mess, so they went into some kind of spacecraft, and all they did all day was sat on beds watching TV and being fed huge amounts of food. And in this film, they had grown really fat and flabby. And it's a kind of warning as to what might happen if we're not careful. So I'm not looking forward to a life in which we have nothing to do. I'm looking forward to a life in which we get intensely interested in all kinds of projects. So it's not just listening to music, it's helping to create our music ourselves. And even though the music we create mightn't be as good as the music that an AI will create, it can still be deeply meaningful to us. For example, when I play sport, I know I'm not playing sport as good as the best professionals, but I can still enjoy it when occasionally, when I'm playing golf, the ball goes roughly in the direction I want it to. When I don't do as good as Tiger Woods or Rory McIlroy and so forth, but it's still pleasant for me. When I'm doing a Sudoku math puzzle, I'm not doing it as fast as an AI could do it, but it's still pleasant, and I can use my brains to figure out the more difficult puzzles. So what will we be doing? In part, we'll be exploring culture. In part, we'll be exploring music. In part, we'll be exploring, some of us at least, will be exploring mathematics. It's a wonderful thing to explore. Some of us will be exploring planets. Some of us will be exploring literature. Some of us will be exploring human relationships of all sorts. Some of us will be exploring virtual reality. In fact, probably the things we'll be spending most of our times on are things that you and I today can't even conceive. It's almost like if we go back, imagine to 4 million years ago, imagine there was a group of apes that somehow realized that their brains were getting bigger, that they were going to have more capability. Imagine they had a conference. What are we going to do with our bigger brains? Is bigger brains good or bad? And they might say, well, we like bananas. Maybe in the future we'll have more bananas. We like sex. Maybe in the future we'll have more sex. They could not conceive of Pythagoras' theorem. They could not conceive of the moons of Jupiter. They could not conceive of the symphonies of Mozart. They could not conceive of Hamlet or Breaking Bad. And likewise, the things that likely our future versions of ourselves will do once we are cognitively enhanced is unlikely to be conceived. Now, in the end, might we get bored? Perhaps. But I'd far rather have that freedom than today's world in which so many people are deeply depressed and not living at all according to the full good life that's possible.
Fair enough, completely. Yeah, so tell me, I mean, you spoke about virtual reality. Now, there's just another parallel conversation going on with the likes of Elon Musk and Nick Bostrom, that possibly we are already in a simulated world. I mean, the world is simulated. What are your views on something like that?
So it's an interesting argument. It's a fascinating argument. And Nick Bostrom produced this argument, the simulation argument, not because he necessarily agrees with this conclusion, but he just says, well, it's a thought experiment, and it shows that some of our thinking is either wrong, or if it's not wrong, then we are likely living in a simulation. The argument is that in the future, civilizations probably will be able to create very rich simulations Therefore, there's probably going to be many more universes which are simulated than the real universe, because there's only one real universe. So if you pick one at random, if we pick our one, what's the likelihood that it's a simulation? Well, there's only one real world, and there's billions of simulations. The chances are billions to one that we are inside a simulation. That's the argument. Now, there's probably something wrong with that argument, but it's still worth looking at. Does it change my life on a daily basis? No. Would I behave differently? I don't know what to do differently. If somebody might think about it harder, and it's useful, and they might say, well, if there's a chance we're living in the simulation, maybe we have to speak to the simulator somehow. Maybe the simulators are waiting for sufficient show of intelligence or humanity or beauty, in which case they might do something different with the simulation, perhaps. But I don't think we have any hope of understanding that. If there are simulators, their motivations are probably far beyond our imaginations. It's a bit like people have all tried to divine the wishes of deities, you know. Why would gods have made a world with so much suffering? Well, we really don't understand. So why would simulators have created a world in which there's so much suffering? It's hard to understand their motivations. So I don't think it's fruitful to speculate on how we should behave differently. We should say, well, let's imagine this is real reality. Let's imagine we are somehow in control of our destiny here. We're not subject to a simulator changing the rules of the game, or a god of one sort. Let's assume responsibility here, and let's do the best we can to radically improve this world. Let's get on a path to faster, flourishing abundance for all, and the transcendence of our present shortcomings.
So would you like to tell us more about RAFT, the new book that you're working on at this point in time?
So RAFT, I don't have a copy to show you, sadly, because I don't have the physical copy yet. I have released it on Kindle, so people worldwide can download this book on Kindle. It's something like $5, so it's not that expensive. It's a more practical guide. RAFT stands for roadmap to abundance and flourishing via transcendence. And the roadmap thing is important. It's not just that we have this big vision of how it would be nice in the future. It's what should we do? So I say this better future is possible by 2035, but we need to know what to do in the next 5 years. So a lot of the book is what should we be doing between now and 2025. The book contains 15 goals for how society should be in 2035, including that only 1% of people should report having mental illness, for example, including that we will have a society in which nobody needs to work. They will have a good life even if they don't work and earn a living. A society in which wonderful education is available to postgraduate level for everybody. A society in which there is much less threat of international warfare. So these are goals for 2035. And then I say, well, if we're going to make these goals, we have to do things in the next 5 years. That's part of the roadmap. So it's had very good reception in the few days. I think it was published on Saturday as an ebook, and people reading it giving me very good feedback about it already. And maybe by the time people watch this podcast, there'll be a paperback copy available too. I always like to do the Kindle version first, just in case I need to make some changes before I do the physical version.
Lovely. So you spoke about a utopian future, but at this point in time where the technology is growing, if you largely see AI is being built with biases, then there is so many of these. There are drones which are killer drones at this point in time. There's killer robots and things like that, and even if synthetic biology, obviously there is chances that once synthetic biology matures, there are chances that all your diseases could be eradicated. Aging could be reversed. That could be treated as a disease and so on and so forth. So there are lot of these awesome promises of technology. But on the other hand, if you see, technology is being run by just a handful. It's being run by maybe the biggest tech behemoths. And earlier in a conversation you mentioned about privacy and security. And that again is a problem. You spoke about politics. Politics where Cambridge Analytica, everybody knows about it. And there is technology. There's one side where people are using technology for good, but then there's another side, where people are using technology for bad. There are the governments are trying to militarize artificial intelligence. So, do you see a utopian future with all of these technologies converging? Because I believe that maybe in the near future, almost all of these technologies are going to converge, right? What are your views on something like that?
This might be the most important question we've discussed. You're entirely right. There are two possible futures ahead, and which comes to pass will depend on us. Would want to be an automatic evolution into this future. If I look ahead, I think by the middle of this century, there's about a 65% chance we'll be living in this wonderful future that I've outlined, this sustainable superabundance. But there's about a 30% chance we'll be living in a terrible future, a new dark age of one type or another, in which some of the things you've spoken about get magnified and multiplied. And that's far too big a risk. So I'm more optimistic than pessimistic, because I think we humans are creative, innovative, wonderful beings. But we do have our dark sides individually, and these dark sides often get magnified by the social systems we put in place. And so it is sadly too likely, far too likely, 30% so likely, that we'll be living in a much worse future. I don't see much possibility that by the middle of the century we're somehow the same as today. We're just a bit faster, a bit cheaper, a bit more populated. You know, this evolutionary incremental future is very unlikely. It's because the powers that are being unleashed with the fourth industrial revolution, NBIC, are so devastating in their capabilities. We're either going to use them for tremendously good outcomes or for tremendously bad outcomes. So how do we swing it? How do we ensure that we end up with a better future? That's what my most recent book is about. What steps do we need to take so that technology comes into the use for everybody, rather than just being under the control of powerful subgroups, whether it's powerful politicians in some part of the world or big tech companies. Of course, the big tech companies will say that they are doing it for enlightened purposes. Their motto has been, don't be evil. But, you know, bad guys very rarely think of themselves as the bad guys. You know, mostly they think they're doing good too. And they may say, well, what's good for us is good for society. You know, our consumers love us, our users love us. But without realizing it, we may end up in a very bad place. And then it may be too late. Many people who used to work in these high-tech companies have left and are speaking out. They say, we shouldn't have done this. So one of the early investors in Facebook, a man called Roger McCamey, I think that's his name, Roger McCamey, he's written a book called Zucked, which lists his growing disillusionment with the management of Facebook, with Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg. And he's increasingly worried that, you know, politicians need to be able to step up and control these big tech titans. And it's difficult because politicians are so much out of touch, mostly, but some of them are in touch. And with the right people getting involved in politics, we can now swing politics so that it really does serve the many rather than serving the few. And this happened in the past. If you look at American history, they had the big railroad giants and steel giants. There were monopolists who were distorting competition, but there was the antitrust rules of the early part of the last century. There was work by Sherman and by Teddy Roosevelt and others that gradually took the power away from the big steel and oil barons. We need to do that again. Too many people in too many countries in the world have bought into the picture that big companies are always good for the planet. No, they're not always good for the planet. They have a tendency to become corrupted over time, and we need to get a groundswell of public opinion speaking up about it. And there is some encouragement. If we look at the groundswell of public opinion about climate change, for example, it is having an effect. So we need more people like Greta Thunberg who are speaking up not just about the risks of climate change, but about these other risks as well. We need to raise the caliber of the conversation, and eventually politicians will listen, because politicians aren't all bad people, and even the bad ones can have a kind of a deathbed conversion or a change in their lives when they can realize actually they should change and alter their course. So I think there are positive routes forward, which is why I'm still 60% positive about the future, but there are plenty of negative risks too. So we can't just sit back and wait for other people to do it. So what you're doing with your podcast, I think, is incredibly important to have this discussion about the future, to highlight not just the good trends, but the bad trends, to highlight actions that people must take to take away the risks of the bad futures and to magnify the risks, the opportunities of the good futures.
Right, fair enough. Yeah, thank you. Yes, I mean, it's a humble effort to kind of like bring about education about what's happening, I mean, but if you largely see, I mean, we live in our own bubbles, right? I mean, whether it's your individuals or institutions or enterprise people, I mean, we're very comfortable with what we're doing, but the future is coming in very fast. Technology is growing exponentially. So what would you tell these individuals or these organizations who are sitting tight and who are not looking at the future?
Well, I would point out that many great organizations that thought they were doing well were disrupted. I look at the likes of Nokia or Kodak, Blockbuster. Almost every industry, the great giants of one period were disrupted by faster moving, smaller organizations from the future. Most of the companies who were powerful with mini computers, nobody's heard of them today because they were overtaken by faster moving companies. So if you're complacent, if you just put your head in the sand, if you try and keep things the same as before, you are likely going to be disrupted by elements outside of your control. So instead, you have to be involved. You have to, first of all, become better at seeing trends. You have to be good at mapping out the likely pace at which trends will develop. You have to be better at imagining scenarios. A scenario is not just one trend, it's the combination of several trends and what that might mean. And you have to be good at setting aside some of your old instincts, because some of our old instincts are not good guides for a very different world of the future. So you have to be able to set these thinking behind. And if you do that, you're more likely to be successful in every area of life, whether it's in business life, social life, personal life, spiritual life.
Lovely. David, thank you. Thank you for giving time and speaking to us and enlightening about all of these technologies and how it's going to impact us. I'm sure, I mean, I got a lot to learn from you, and I'm sure the listeners will get to know a lot from this conversation also. And to my listeners, if you like what you see in here, please press the subscribe button. And David, really appreciate you doing this for us. Thank you. Yeah, bye-bye. See ya.
My pleasure. Thank you.